She thought she had time to slip out before I noticed. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed, was that my early return wasn't a whim. It was a trap, and she had walked right into it. To really understand how we ended up with cops in my driveway and the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood in handcuffs, you've got to go back about 6 months. That's when I bought what I thought was my forever home. After a decade grinding away in cramped city apartments while building my business, I finally had the means to buy space, quiet, sunlight, a place that felt like mine. It was a sleek, modern house of glass and steel in a neighborhood where the lawns looked like golf course greens and everyone waved just enough to seem friendly. What I didn't factor into my dream was the HOA, or more specifically, Linda Marks. She came knocking less than a week after I moved in. Clipboard pressed to her chest like she was guarding state secrets. Late 50s, bleach blonde ponytail pulled tight enough to make her eyebrows jump, and a wardrobe that screamed resort clearance sale. She drove an ancient Mercedes so polished it reflected like chrome, the perfect metaphor for her. All shine, no substance. Her smile was tight, her eyes cold, and her first words were about my mailbox. See, I'd chosen a minimalist black steel design that matched my home. Linda informed me it was non-compliant, and that the HOA-approved style was a hideous faux colonial thing in forest green. The fine? $50 a day. I tried to reason with her, told her the mailbox was part of the architectural look, but it was like talking to a smug, condescending brick wall. The rules are the rules, she said. We have to maintain aesthetic integrity. I looked from my glass-walled house to her idea of integrity and gave up. I bought the ugly mailbox. And that, I would learn, was my first mistake. The mailbox opened the floodgates. I got written up for leaving my garbage bins out 45 minutes too long after pickup. Got cited because the Japanese maple I planted wasn't on the approved flora list. Even got a warning for having a package sit on my porch for more than 3 hours. Apparently it was an eyesore. Each notice was written in that syrupy sweet, yet cutting tone only someone drunk on petty power can perfect. One afternoon, my neighbor Arthur, a retired engineering professor with a wicked sense of humor, caught me crouched over my lawn with a ruler, measuring blade height to avoid the next fine. He just laughed. Getting the Linda treatment, huh? She's been running this HOA like her own private fiefdom for years. She lives in one of the original shoebox houses by the gate. And she hates anyone in these new builds. I think it kills her to see people with more space than she's got. Then he told me about the time she fined a family because their grandson's birthday party had excessive balloonage. That's who we were dealing with. So when I landed a high-stakes contract in Hong Kong that was going to keep me overseas for a month, I thought the biggest risk would be jet lag. The HOA required notice if you'd be gone more than 2 weeks. So I sent an email with my exact travel dates, May 1st to June 1st, and, because of a bylaw I'd argued against but lost, I handed over an emergency key. Linda, as president, was the keeper of those keys. I also armed my fortress, a security system of my own design, cameras inside and out, sensors on every window and door, smart home logs that recorded every touch of a thermostat or flick of a light switch. The first week in Hong Kong was a blur. It wasn't until the second week that the data started talking to me. First, a thermostat adjustment in my bedroom, from my energy-saving 65 degrees up to a cozy 72 degrees. Then, 2 days later, my smart fridge registered a gallon of milk, yogurt, and a bottle of cheap Chardonnay I would never drink. That's when my pulse kicked up. I checked my media server logs. Someone had spent 3 hours watching a reality show about rich housewives. I tunneled into my live camera feeds, and there they were, Linda and her husband, Ted, sprawled on my couch like they owned it, wine in my crystal glasses, feet on my ottoman, flipping through channels on my 85-inch TV. They weren't robbing me. They were living in my house. My first instinct was to call the cops, but then the strategist in me took over. If I did it from across the world, she'd spin a story about a leak, or an inspection, or fulfilling her HOA duty. I'd be the crazy absentee owner calling in from bad hotel Wi-Fi. No, this needed to be airtight. I needed proof, so overwhelming she couldn't talk her way out. So I became a ghost in my own home. I pulled every second of HD footage, every log entry. I watched her drink my best scotch on the patio with friends, sleep in my bed, wander into my office, run her hands over my leather chair. And then there was the footage from my walk-in closet, cedar-lined, with my late wife's clothes still hanging there. The Sonos playlist told me her taste in music, cheesy 80s soft rock. The espresso machine logs showed my gourmet beans disappearing. The smart toilet, yeah, I know, tracked their every use. My spreadsheet of their occupancy patterns was insane. But the gold was in the audio. My state's a one-party consent state, so I toggled the mic in my office camera. Almost immediately, I caught her on the phone to a friend, gushing, "Oh, it's fabulous, Marge. The owner's some rich tech nerd off in Asia. The least I can do is keep the place running. Ted's in heaven with the TV. We'll just be out by the 31st, and he'll never know." That was my smoking gun. I sent a still shot and that audio to my lawyer, David Chun. He called me in under an hour. In 20 years. I've seen a lot of stupid, but this is a masterpiece. We're going to bury her. We hatched the plan. I'd fly back May 15th. She'd be confident, careless. When I walked in, she'd react on instinct, and that reaction would be her undoing. Landing back in the States, I skipped my usual car service. Had a cab drop me 2 blocks away so I could walk in unseen. It was a perfect sunny afternoon, sprinklers ticking, birds chirping, the calm before the storm. Her Mercedes sat in her own driveway, so I knew she was in my place. Rounding the last corner, I saw her on my porch, lounging in one of my chairs, sipping wine in Eleanor's silk kimono. She didn't see me until I was halfway up the drive. The panic on her face was almost comical, until she shoved it down and replaced it with that familiar scowl. "Who are you? This is private property." I set my suitcase down. "Hello, Linda. I live here." She flushed deep red. "That's impossible. The owner isn't due back for 2 weeks." She just confessed she knew my schedule. Then she yanked out her phone and, with a voice full of fake fear, called 911. Within minutes, 2 squad cars rolled up. Officer Reed looked fresh out of the academy, hand on his holster. Sergeant Miller was older, calmer, taking everything in. Linda was all wide eyes and trembling hands, telling them I was a dangerous trespasser. I stayed quiet, let her spin her web. When Miller finally asked for my ID, I moved slow, handed over my license. The address matched. Linda's voice went shrill. "He could have stolen it. I'm the HOA president. I'm responsible for this property." I asked if I could prove ownership at the front door. They agreed. I walked past her, pressed my thumb to the biometric lock. Soft chime, bolt retracted, door cracked open. You could feel the shift in the air. That's when David's sedan pulled up. He strode over, introduced himself, and told the officers we had extensive video and audio of Linda and Ted's 17-day stay. "Not an inspection," he said coldly. "A vacation. Complete with dinner parties, fine liquor, and wearing the late Mrs. Hale's clothing." He played them the audio clip of her plan to leave before I returned. Ted picked that moment to peek out. One look at the scene and he cracked. I told her it was a bad idea. She made me do it. Miller didn't need more. "Linda Marks, you have the right to remain silent." The cuffs clicked, and Arthur watched from his lawn, giving me a slow nod that said everything. The case was open and shut. Faced with the evidence, she pled guilty to trespass and theft, got 3 years probation, heavy fines, and had to pay me back for every drop of wine, every scrap of food, every coffee bean. They had to sell their house to cover it. I signed the restitution check over to a local housing charity. But it wasn't just about her. The HOA board scrambled. At the emergency meeting, David and I laid it out. How the emergency key bylaw was a loaded gun in the wrong hands. I showed the room photos of her parties on my patio, transcripts of her bragging, gasps, murmurs, heads shaking. The bylaw was repealed unanimously, the whole board resigned, and Arthur was elected president. A few weeks later, I swapped that ugly green mailbox bag for my sleek black one. One evening, I sat on my patio with a glass of the same scotch she'd stolen, watching the sunset, thinking how her hunger for something she didn't earn had cost her everything she already had. And I realized, people like Linda thrive on intimidation and the assumption you won't push back. But when you do, when you come armed with patience and proof, all that power just evaporates. They're not wolves. They're just foxes in the henhouse, until the farmer comes home. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Was I too patient, or not patient enough? Drop your thoughts below, because I have a feeling this one's going to split the room wide open.